Okay.
Yeah.
Go.
Hi, I'm Mariya, Mari, for those who listen to the Bi Positive podcast, the select few. I'm a therapist. I'm based in the Netherlands. I'm originally from Ukraine. And when it comes to representation, coming from Ukraine, it was a little bit hard to see any queer characters, like even gay characters was difficult to find. So my experience with representation really starts after I discovered Tumblr and the internet. So I think we're going to talk more about this in detail later.
So I'm Marie-Diane, MD. I'm from France. I'm a therapist. I work with Mariya. We have the Bi Positive podcast together, also therapy practice. And also actually did my thesis on the impact of representation on mental health. So if you are more interested in that results aspect, we can talk about it, but I won't dwell too much into details because it can be super boring, depending on what's interesting for you. So my experience is, so I'm a little bit older, so has already shared that in one of the panelists, that my first experience with form of representation was in Buffy, and I'm bi, and not in seeing Willow going from a guy to a girl and then like being a lesbian all of a sudden made me very, very confused. And I think that at that time, if I had the word bi or something, that positive example and something more explicit about it at the time, when I was a teenager, it would have been very, very, very helpful, and I would probably not have come out as late as I have. But I have to say that the YouTube experience was very helpful in my coming out process, which was much later on in my life.
All right, my turn. Hi, I'm Han. I'm from Ireland, and I have mental health. I feel like I'm still looking for representation in the media. I feel like there's a serious lack of masculine of center women or AFAB people and non-binary people in the media. I usually can only think of one example, that being Big Boo in Orange is the New Black, which I'll talk a bit more about later. But yeah, growing up in rural Ireland, I had about 4 channels and bad internet. So I think the first time, apart from Ellen, that I saw queer people and queer AFAB people on screen was Glee, which was huge when I was about 15 or 16. So that was like a big deal. But again, although I loved Britney and Santana, they were both very femme. And so, yeah, it's a lot of relating in a stretch to people who don't necessarily have the same experiences as me. That makes sense? Yeah.
Me? I'm Kerry. I use they, them pronouns. I'm still just as nervous as the first time I did a panel. I have had mental health problems my whole life as a kid growing up. They have changed, as have I. Representation, also Willow and Tara. But, you know, Oz was there as well. These days, the only person that I see that is kind of similar, I don't know, someone I can be like, oh yeah, I might be able to relate to very small parts of your identity and your character is, how is it gone? I don't laugh.
Oh,
Jesus.
Alexander.
Yeah. And that's it. That's it.
Okay, so I really want to know what you guys are interested in and ask for. Okay, do you have questions? Do you have anything you want to share? Let's make that a little bit more interactive and not just us talking about ourselves, about our experience. Come on. The first one is the most difficult, always.
Maybe.
Yeah. What? Sorry, it's more question for Hannah.
Yeah.
So you say that you haven't found any representation that looks like you or you can relate to. What exactly would you want to see, or what would be like the perfect representation?
So I like Big Boo, and I think Big Boo does a lot of stuff that hasn't been done in media, where it's like, if you disregard the first couple of seasons and when they actually start to develop her character, she exits the trope where the butch woman is always the butt of the joke because she's a butch woman. And I think it was really great what they've been doing with her character, and they've kind of been developing her further and fleshing her out. But yeah, she's still a very strong character. She, very... It's hard to nitpick when you have so few examples of representation because there is such a spectrum of experience, and you're like, just because I necessarily don't relate to this doesn't mean a lot of butch women wouldn't. But personally, I would like to see more gender non-conforming women, butch women, non-binary people who are allowed to be bisexual and not just like aggressively lesbian. And I would like them to be written by people who have those experiences so that they don't equate queer female attraction to male attraction towards women, which they often do, I find, because it is a different experience. And I'd also really like to see these butch mask of center characters being portrayed as vulnerable, like having vulnerability, having emotion, and not being imbued with elements of this closed-off aggressive masculinity that people kind of tend to project onto them just because they appear to be mannish. You know what I mean?
I would like to see a non-binary character where it's not just about their identity, like that's just, part of them, that talks about their mental health, that you can see someone managing their mental health well and living a good, happy life. And someone, so also pansexual, that'd be cool, which, is under the bisexual umbrella. So they could be bisexual too, whatever. Someone who is attracted to more than one gender. I just really want to see someone who is like queer and has a mental health problem and is doing well at life. Someone please give me that. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
Hi, my name's Zoe. I was wondering, as someone that's struggled with mental health issues all my life, and I've had, and many of which relate to identification, so definitely less to do with sexuality, actually, more to do with growing up in a bit of a white world. But it has both challenges, and they're both impacted me. But one thing I've often wondered about myself is, my question to you guys is, as someone that's living with depression, I've often wondered, would I have been depressed anyway if I'd have been white and straight? Or are we all equating our mental health challenges, are we attributing them to our sexuality and the struggles that we face as a result? Because I don't want to make any assumptions about that. Just wondered what your experiences were.
Okay, I'm going to take it. Go ahead. Okay, there are several things here, and I think everyone can contribute to that answer. But like I'm just going to take like a little bit of a professional and research perspective for now. Is that there are a lot of work that has been done on the topic and why sexual minorities and gender minorities have higher rates of mental health issues. And one of the prevalent model is a minority stress model that explains that because of social stigma, social pressure, I'm going to make it short, but there's an internalization, and that's the higher rates of mental health issues associated with that because of the external pressures and the way we internalize them. So it's the actual discrimination, but it's also just the expectation of rejection and all the ideas, everything that we hear and then that we internalize. And I am not a specialist at all of the research on other type of minorities and racial minorities, but I think it works a lot in the same way. And then there are different ways of fighting this minority stress. The main two factors are social support, so creating the community, being uplifted by other people who are like you, finding acceptance, but also building a strong identity as a minority. So it's really self-acceptance. And it's deconstructing all the internalized stigma, and there's a lot. And in a situation where we really don't expect it. So there's this structural, social situation that, yes, makes things more difficult when you really belong to a minority, and here we talk about sexual and gender minorities. But also there are personal predisposition, I might say, and this is something different. And I don't know you, I can't know, and there's not really a way to know. And some people are a little bit more vulnerable than others because they are genetic predisposition, because of the way their parents love them. I mean, like the parenting style influences things as well. There's a lot of things there that they're different factors. It's very layered. But definitely what we know, and it's all very individual. And it doesn't mean in any way that you're broken or that something's wrong. It's just understanding how you function and how, as a person, as an individual, you're going to respond to all these environments, the stressors because you're a minority, but also then the life experience that you have had, and you have internal strength and also vulnerabilities. We all have that. And since Jen tried to, what we try to do a lot with our clients is to deconstruct the internalized stigma, but also understand where their strengths are and how to work with that to find some people say live it as your authentic self and be the happiest person. I think like already live as your comfortable self is already a good thing, and be the most functional you can be, the happiest you can be, and it can be pretty happy.
Yeah, and a lot of what happens with queer clients especially, and racial minority clients, is that they're hyper-aware of how the world is unfair. They're hyper-aware of the bad things that happen. And a lot of people have this internal pull towards changing the world, and they feel this obligation to represent where they come from. And a lot of the times, that's great, but only if you feel confident enough to do that. So there's a lot of pressure we put on ourselves as queer people that we have to somehow step up and change the world and like make it such an inclusive place. But it's at one point you have to realize that you're just a drop in the ocean, and your first responsibility is to yourself. And that is one of the things that is the hardest, at least in my experience, to make the client understand from a purely sociological standpoint.
Yeah, to understand that you first start with yourself, because you won't be able to change the world like that. I mean, I wish we could, obviously, but it won't be possible. So first, understand how you function and how you can resist to this pressure from within with your internal resources.
This is turning into a bit of a personal therapy session.
Oh, yeah.
I'm like, oh, okay, cool, yeah.
Okay, I mean, we're therapists. What do you think we're going to do?
Thanks, guys. I'm not paying you, though.
You're the odd one out.
They're all therapists, and I'm not, so.
But I also, that minority stress thing also made me think, like, going back to the representation thing, like that a lot of the queer stories out there are about, they're coming out, and like it's a singular thing, like we come out all the time. We're constantly, like I tried to explain some journalist students who are doing this project on LGBT people in the what do you call that? On the countryside, whatever. And they asked me, okay, so how do you do that? Like come out? How do you like make that decision on when to come out and not? I'm like, yeah, how do I do that? I've done that so many times, like really like scanning the room, trying to figure out, okay, are these people homophobic or not? Am I even safe? Like all these things that constantly you have to do this analysis every time you go into like another context that you're not familiar with people you don't know yet. So like I think that's definitely also a great part of our lives as queer people that people don't really talk about. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
I've already talked enough.
I mean, I'll say what you usually say, and what research shows is that, I mean, yes, we come out all the time, every day. Like, there is something that happens that makes us feel exposed in that way. But there is research that shows that if you come out across many different aspects of your life, not necessarily many people in your life, but many aspects, like at work, in your family, with your friends, that actually improves your mental health, because you feel like you have more roots in all of these different things.
If it's safe, of course.
If it's safe, of course. Of course, we're talking about safety. We're talking about an ideal world where these kinds of things are easier to do. But in terms of also what you said about a lot of straight people not understanding that coming out is not a singular thing, I was actually thinking this morning about the kind of representation that I would love to see. And I was thinking something like a Love Actually style movie with a lot of different queer characters, where it's just like a part of their experience, and that coming out happens all the time. Like, that would be so cool, just to see that, you know, you don't just come out once and suddenly the world is perfect and accepting, or it's terrible and, you know, something horrible happens, but that is a process. And it's also not to say that the more you come out, the easier it gets, because it doesn't. And it all depends on also the person on the other end, the people on the other end that would respond to your coming out. So yeah, it's a huge problem to make people understand that, and I wish that media kind of addressed that a little more.
Yeah, I think it's really time for the coming out narrative to somewhat be abandoned, because it does seem to be the central focus of so many queer stories, and usually when they're quite young, teen or early 20s, and that's kind of like the pivotal thing that the story is written around. And what I'm struggling a lot with now as I get older is I've realized I've never, apart from the few older queer people that I'm lucky enough to get to meet and befriend, I don't know what my life is going to look like. Like, I've been having kind of casual conversations with my friend, like, what would you even call a non-binary parent, you know? And Moyo came up with Baba, which is apparently generally you can say mom or dad is Baba, so I thought like that. But, you know, and it's like, what next? What comes after coming out, you know? And what happens when you have figured out your identity, but you're still struggling to live your life because the world hasn't changed, and you just keep getting gayer, and like it doesn't get easier. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
I feel like I come out every time I meet someone new, because I introduce myself as Kerry and that I use they them pronouns.
And you feel like there's a certain pressure to do that when you're comfortable doing so, because I don't know, especially when you work in community projects and you're kind of involved, you really do get to understand the absolute breadth of people who aren't comfortable doing that and are scared, and you should feel a certain responsibility to kind of put yourself out there for that. And I know I felt that way for a long time, because I've always been a very visible queer person. I started dressing quite masculinely from a young age. So a lot of people knew I was gay before I knew I was gay, which made for a fun coming out. But you know, as a consequence of that, I have had a lot of people tell me that I've been very inspirational to them, or that I help them, just me kind of like being myself, help them kind of be themselves and see themselves. And I recognize that, and you know, be the queer you want to see in the world kind of thing. But it is exhausting, and it's not getting easier to go outside, because the only way I can go outside and not feel stressed or uncomfortable is if I'm dressing like in a way that makes me stressed and uncomfortable, if that makes sense. Yes. Yeah, I don't really know how to expand on that. I'm not very articulate today, sorry.
And I just wanted to bring that back to also the idea of the way representation is going to affect all of that. As you said, once you're done with coming out, like, okay, what's happening? And it's something like, if I go back to research that has showed up, that has, one of the results is that good representation shows more than just a coming out. And when it shows more than a coming out, it's reassuring about the future and what's going to happen. And it has a real impact on mental health in a positive way. And then there's a more like social impact of it, is that the more you normalizes things on screen, of course, it has an impact on mental health, because one of the mechanism is that it normalizes the queer experience, but it does it also on a social level. So it's less weird for people to see someone who was assigned female at birth presenting in a masculine way. It's become something more normal. So there's a double impact there.
Yeah, and it takes the pressure off the people who are just living their lives to be like ambassadors for that, and just kind of always be ready to educate and listen openly, when really sometimes you just want to go the fuck home and have a bath.
Yeah, completely.
And that's where representation matters, in the way that, like, we have clients coming to us asking, like, what am I supposed to do? And one of the best things to do to tell them is, if you have a good example, be like, you know, the character in that TV show, they did that. Yeah, you should totally look at that. And for them to see that there is a way to live, being who they are, it's super reassuring, because those stories are already out there. And they're not perfect. No story is perfect. Everyone will take something different away from a story. But the most important thing is that stories have a beginning and an ending. And if the story ends at coming out, then that's where the insecurity starts. So if the coming out is the beginning of the story, maybe that could be much more interesting to see.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, just lots of questions.
So I'm a stand-up comedian, but I don't talk about mental health or sexuality on stage. So I've got 5 minutes, and it's much funnier than stand-up Jacob Rees-Mogg. But sometimes when I feel guilty, because I'm like, I could be stood in front of people who actually sometimes just having a laugh about these things really helps normalise it. And I just kind of, like, should I feel as guilty as I do? Like, you know, because sometimes, is it okay just to not talk about it? I mean, and I'm very open in my personal life and in my day job.
You're allowed to look after yourself.
Yeah.
And my response to that is also, have you seen Nanette? It's on Netflix.
I was going to bring that up.
Yeah. But it's a great example of how, you know, it's very difficult to talk about yourself in such a personal way on stage. It's never easy. And the way our culture functions right now is that a lot of times minorities, being it sexual, gender, racial minorities, end up being the butt of the joke. And a lot of the humor, even that comes from us, like Hannah Gadsby said, it's self-deprecating humor. So it would be really cool to see a stand-up comedian who can do that, who can talk about their sexuality in a positive way and make it funny, but in a way that's not damaging to themselves. But in terms of feeling a personal responsibility, as I've said before, you don't have to do it if you don't feel comfortable doing it. Because there are going to be more generations of people doing it after you. And it's just a matter of taking one step into the right direction, and people will catch on.
What comes to mind for me is the kind of internet culture of gallows humor, depression humor. You know what I'm talking about. Because I definitely do make those kind of jokes all the time with my friends. You know, it on some level it does help alleviate the isolation of it and the kind of the heavy feelings, because it's just a moment of shared lightness about something that can be quite dark. But at the same time, especially after watching Nanette and talking with some people who really find that kind of humor distressing, and I'm wondering how much am I lingering on making light of these things that are really damaging me and damaging my experience of my own life.
Yeah, I can go to answer that in a way and say, okay, humor is a defense mechanism, as any other, a coping strategy, if it's a formulation that's more familiar to you. And as any coping strategy or defense mechanism, it's functional to a certain point. Depression is a defense mechanism. Sometimes you need to just slow down. The system has to slow down. It has to numb things so that it's bearable. It's not functional when you can't get out of the house at a hole for months at a length, and it's become dysfunctional. But if it's like half a day when you need to stop, it's okay. So sometimes it's functional to a certain extent. All defense mechanism, coping strategy can be functional. Humor is one of them, and it can become dysfunctional when it starts to hurt, when it becomes an avoidance strategy.
Yeah.
And so, to answer the question, it really depends about how you feel, and maybe there will be a moment, the timing will be right for you to talk about that on stage, because you'll have the opportunity, because you'll be ready. There's a lot of things there. I don't know you, I know more than that, but it's about how you feel, and as Kerry said, you have to protect yourself first.
Yeah, I just graduated, and one of my final degree show pieces was I wrote a comic about living with depression, and I was very depressed at the time. So a lot of first-hand material, and I kind of didn't look at it since I graduated. I was taking time out, and I've gone back to it recently, and I'm actually finding it very difficult to look at it because I realized that there was no real ending. It was kind of just really just kind of trying to capture depressive feelings and how they exist, because I'm really interested in how art can be a bit more relatable than words, because language is so different for everyone. You can imbue so many meanings from different words. And I'm struggling a lot with it because I thought it would be this very helpful thing and of like expressing things and getting it out there. But now I realize I've just kind of taken a snapshot of a really dark place, and I'm kind of still in a stage with my mental illness that I don't know how I'm going to get out of it, and I don't know what comes next. And I kind of wish that there was more out there about, coming out of long-term mental illness.
It's a balance thing. Yeah. In there. Okay, sorry, just sure something.
Yeah, I wanted to talk a bit about just like fandom and the relation with mental illness, because like I grew up with mental illness. I had it since I was a kid, and that becomes like a very lonely thing. And then I kind of turned to fandom because I wasn't obviously real people, and it was very linked to my mental health. Like when Lexa died, I tried to kill myself, and that's hard to say out loud, because like I look back on that now and I'm like, that was so dramatic. But like I look back on it, and it was a time where I'd also just dropped out of college. I was really lonely, and like I remember feeling like it was just like a period of my life where I was like drowning, and like every episode that aired, it was like coming up for air, like just for like a couple hours, and it's weird because I look back on it now, and I'm getting less involved in fandom.
Mm-hmm.
I've changed my meds. I'm, getting more involved with real society, and I look back on that now, and it's starting to feel really weird for me. Like, how did that kind of affect me so much? So from like a psychologist point of view or a therapist point of view, like, what's like the link there?
Just how old were you?
I was 17.
Sorry?
I was 17. No, I'm 19 now.
No, yeah, we were 17 back then. Well,
thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. It's becoming a group therapy session now. It's okay. Okay, there's quite a lot of things to say. So it's very natural to look up for social support in fandoms. It's a way of finding social support. And you're not the only one who went through that kind of experience with Lexa's death. To be honest, what happened there is also what had inspired me to work on that topic of representation and understanding how it impacts our mental health. And I then decided to take a positive spin on it because I wanted to see how I could use it in therapy in a positive way and not necessarily just focus on the negative things. But Lexa was, empowering, and it was easy to get emotionally involved in that representation because it was pretty well done for, at least that part of the show. The rest, okay. But that part of the show was pretty well done, and with great chemistry between the actresses, obviously. So it's a very natural response for you to get engaged as much in this character, especially because you had reassurance that nothing bad was supposed to happen. And it did. So, and that you were 17. You were a teenager. And I'm not going to delve into the changes and the internal turmoil of a teenager. You're looking to understand who you are, to build who you are, to make sense of the world. And your brain isn't completely in a place where it's possible, because hormones, because a lot of things, because your impulse control is not even completely mature yet. There's so many things there. So it really does make sense even if I mean, we'd need like probably a lot more time and one-on-one to really understand what happened and why. But clearly, what happened to you makes a lot of sense, that you would have gotten like used this character as an outlet, as a way, as an anchor, and then something happened, and something that you were told wouldn't happen, and so that just tipped you over the edge in a way. And again, without like going more into details, it seems very natural and understandable to me as a professional that it happened, especially for given your age and everything you were telling me. And yeah, that's. And for the more profound reasons, it's a little bit more time for that, understanding more of your story. I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
I mean, I'd say to that I can sort of relate to being 17 and being lost and finding solace in fandoms. I moved away when I was 17. I went to college quite early, and my life just kind of got out of control, and I was anorexic for about half a year, and then I started recovery. But during that time, I spent so much time on Tumblr. I was constantly like talking and like RPing with people because that was the only thing that was a constant in my life in a way. I mean, classes, whatever. Like I could do those in my sleep, but like the pure human interaction with those people that seemed to have the same ideas that I did. But also the detachment that it gave me, the comfort that that detachment brought, that was super powerful. And still, until this very day, I'm super fond of all the fandoms that I've been in and that I am in now. And the thing is, a lot of people seek out help in fandoms, so you're definitely not alone there. And sometimes, you start talking about like fan fiction, and then you end up talking about your life story with people, and it's beautiful because you may never meet them, and you may never talk to them, and in real life, but you feel a certain connection. And it's not just about the character, it's not just about the story, it's about the fandom, it's about knowing that there is a community. And we've talked about the fact that a community can make you feel so much stronger and so much more reassured. And when that collapses, that it opens a whole new can of worms that is very difficult to shut.
I noticed that towards the end of what you were speaking there, you were a little bit dismissive about it and saying that you were wondering why it was so dramatic and stuff. And I'd just be wary of that kind of language when you're talking to yourself, because especially as AFAB people, like even me looking like this, I get socialized as a woman, and we are socialized to that any excessive emotions we're oversensitive or overdramatic. And I just would encourage you to not talk to yourself like that. Really change the language with how you view things and say, no, that really was damaging, and it was maybe I was acting dramatically because I was really hurting and I was trying to reach out.
Yeah. And I think fandoms and ships that come with that, I don't want to make assumptions about your life or your family, but I know a lot of people, myself included, I was looking for a family because I didn't have a biological one that supported me. And so when you're disappointed in such a way, and when characters get killed off, it's heartbreaking, and it is like someone from your family or your friend has gone. I was a mess after they killed Tara off in Buffy. Like I cried for like days. Yeah, I know that's not quite the same, and I'm not trying to compare our stories, but it's strong. Like it is. It's like losing part of your family or a friend.
And we're talking about like coping strategies earlier, and actually fandoms are pretty good coping strategies. Normally, things are going to happen, but they can be really uplifting, and that's social support, and that's exactly what you can need at a certain moment of your life. Well, another question over there.
Yeah, I just wondered what your thoughts were, if you had any, the idea of assigning a mental illness to a character that isn't explicitly stated. So I've been trying to think of examples. A non-LGBT example would be Big Bang Theory, the character of Sheldon.
Yeah.
The producers very much say he's not, because autism not written, but it very much seems to be written as like a person with Asperger's or some form of autism. So just wondered what your thoughts on that. Is it good to maybe assign, so trauma. And as season 4, Beth went through what could be termed a period of depression. But is it dangerous to design it as naturally stated, or is that where we could find some good representation?
It's a difficult one because if it's trying to present an authentic character, often you don't know that you're struggling with these things. But yeah, I don't know. I believe there is a power in naming things, and I think avoidance can often be a cop-out to not necessarily deal with things properly or portray things properly. What's coming to mind in a kind of tangential way is bisexuality, and how so often if there's an implicit bisexual character in a show, they never say they're bisexual. It's all in kind of a wink wink nudge nudge thing, which is obviously like not great in terms of representation, because you want to have open and happy and proud bisexual characters. So in a similar way, I don't think it's that helpful to have a character who's displaying these traits and have it not addressed in some way, because then what's the point? I feel like it's then just either othering, it's unnecessarily othering this character with like no explanation and no resolution, and often then they become demonized because their actions are seen as hurtful or problematic, which they can be, and obviously you can be hurtful when you're suffering from mental illness, and that doesn't excuse it. But yeah, I would be quite cross if someone wrote a depressed character or a character with BPD and then it wasn't addressed.
I would say this, from a therapeutic standpoint, myself, is how I work, is that I rarely give diagnoses to people. First of all, I don't work with insurance, so I don't need to. And second is that when you talk about labels like depression or bipolar or BPD, like you are labeling a person. And for some people, having that label is important because then they understand, oh, this is what was happening to me. And it's in a book, so I know that it's real, and I'm not just making it up. Because for a lot of people, that is a concern. That I'm just being ridiculous. This is not something people go through. But on the other hand, some people find these kinds of labels stigmatizing, and so then I personally try to shy away from saying, you have depression. Instead, I look at the symptoms, because that's what diagnostic labels are. They are an umbrella term for a collection of symptoms. And so from that standpoint, I would say that sometimes it's okay to not name a disorder when it comes to media, because people for whom that kind of representation is intended, they will understand, because they will see it. On the other hand, though, I do believe that there should be some more naming in media, because that would destigmatize the label. And the example that I can think of is Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, because they say out loud that she has borderline personality disorder, and the way they handle that is very respectful. It portrays the good, the bad, and the ugly of it, and it gives a lot of people hope that they can deal with it somehow, and that even though the title of the show is Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, it's not very nice, but that's the whole point, because the world is not nice to these people, and they can find some sort of solace in knowing that there is a character out there who, despite all the crap that she's done and all the crap that she's been through, she can function and live this colorful life.
And be sympathetic, because she's a protagonist. So.
Yeah.
Something that's coming to mind for me, I'm just going to talk about characters who commit suicide for a bit. So, please feel free to tune out or leave if you're not comfortable. But I remember I used to watch House MD a lot, and I don't know if you remember in season, was it 4, that one of the characters committed suicide out of nowhere, and that was kind of the whole point. And it was then a reflection. It was kind of it was House's character arc to be like, why didn't I see it? Why didn't I see it? And so I feel like it really made this suicide kind of a reason for another character's personal development or inwardness. And all I did was put a suicide on screen quite graphically, there was blood, I will add a man of color, of course, and what good does that do other than the idea of suicide? and depression, and it make it unknowable and unreachable. So yeah, I just kind of want to put it that.
It's I think it's for a lot of things, like for the presentation of LGBTQ character, it depends who is in the writer's room and how it's written. Because if it's done respectfully and with people who know what they're doing, or at least trying to understand what's going on, which is the case in Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, because now she's really turning things around, if you've seen the last episodes, and it's very interesting to see that. When it's done like that, it's very, very positive. And even if there's no label, if there's no diagnosis, it can be good. It's of course really bad when it's just either a talking character or it's just for the joke, which kind of Sheldon is, to be honest. It's just a joke, and it should be more than that. It can be funny, but it should be more than that.
I'm also a character coming to mind is Holt from Brooklyn Nine-Nine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's not explicitly said or anything, but it he does show problems with social interactions, right? And it is made of a joke sometimes, but not like he's not the butt of the joke. Yes. Yeah. And he's very like these characters, what I like about them, and also Jake having some kind of, I could definitely see some ADHD symptoms there, or kind of relatable also. And what I like about that show is that they start out as these very caricatures. Yeah, caricatures, and then they actually evolve into three-dimensional characters, every single one of them, and also those ideas being bad. Yeah. Yeah, so really that show, even though it's very subtle, except for the bisexual thing, which is great. What do you think about the way they portray these characters?
I'd say there's a lot to love about Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Yes. I think you hit the nail on the head when you said that, when you start the show, when you start episode 1, season 1, you kind of already, you think you know what the characters are about, because Rosa is kind of like the deadpan, badass one. Holt is socially awkward, but also super strict about rules, and Jake is all over the place. And you kind of, you think you know how their story is going to go. And then as you get attached to the characters and as the show progresses and you see them grow and you see them become this kind of family, that's when it hits you hard. That's when you realize that there is so much more to it than just comedy. And I think in that case, that is comedy done right. And that is comedy that can also make you think. Because I never expected much from Brooklyn Nine-Nine when I started watching it. I was people told me it was a good show, but I was well, whatever. And now I'm I'm attached to these characters because they feel real despite all the jokes and despite all the humor. They feel authentic. So yeah, I'm fangirling a little bit.
I mean, I think, as I said, they handled the whole Rosa thing very, very well. Also because they talked to Stephanie Beatrice and they use their experience as well. Yeah. And so I guess for the mental health thing, I can only guess that they're doing the same thing. Is that not writing things out of the blue, but trying to document it and understand what they're doing a little bit more. So yeah, very good representation.
I've never watched it. Oh my God. I'm a
God.
terrible human being.
Yeah, you're in for a treat.
Okay.
That's good. We'll watch it.
I guess
you're all in for not shaming people for not watching the show.
I will start watching it next week. That is my promise to all of you.
And also one day at a time.
I've watched that.
Yeah.
I've watched that.
Also.
Speaking of good representation.
Absolutely. Yeah, I have another question.
Just going back on the previous one, that was really interesting. So I've never assigned that sort of view of Holt or Jake before, and so I guess maybe it's because I wouldn't think to. But also, I think it's good. You've obviously seen that in them, and that's obviously how that's going to be I'm sure for many other people. But people who aren't seeing it, isn't it bad that it's not being said, or it's not more explicit? Should we want to?
No.
I don't know. I didn't really I knew that back in my head I was Jake is kind of slightly ADHD, but I never really thought of Holt in that way. To me, he was just a very stoic, kind of almost a bit vintage character, like from another age, like, you know, very courteous is the word I'm looking for. But yeah, no, I think that's interesting. But yeah, I don't know, because then is it like, yeah, I don't know. I'm sorry.
I said, as Mariya said before, people who need to see it will see it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and another thing is also, I mean, we've talked a lot about Rosa here because everyone loves Rosa. But since we mentioned Holt, I think we also need to give Holt a lot of attention, because Holt is a prime example of how to make a multidimensional, intersectional character right and alive. And yes, he's funny, but he's also so much more. And he talks about a struggle being on the police force and being gay and being black. There's so many things about him that are super interesting, and I would imagine for a lot of people are super relatable.
You can tell that a lot of the humor is for people who align themselves with the characters. Like one of Holt's best jokes is, you know, the worst thing about being a black gay man in the police force? The discrimination. Like, that's so funny. You know, but like straight white people aren't going to think that's funny. And that's something I appreciate about the show. And I think that is something that should be taken on board when trying to represent any of these sort of things, that it's for the people who align themselves with it. Like, it is for the representation, and it's, you know, it is so much more powerful than when you're reaching and being like, okay, this character seems kind of gay, I'm going to obsess over them and write fan fiction in the hope that they'll kiss one day, and they never do. Like all the gay baiting, like Sherlock and all that sort of nonsense.
Don't look at me. Okay, I'm just going to say we have 4 minutes left, so maybe just another question.
Yeah, last question.
Yeah.
Or if anyone else has like a better question.
Go ahead.
Only thing some of you identify as like having multi-gender attraction. So I was just kind of interested in how do you think that the link between like mental illness and the erasure of certain queer identities, and like being in certain spaces and not having certain parts of your identity being recognised? If there's a link, or like, I don't know, if that's a bad question.
I mean, we kind of discussed that the other day, I think, with all of you, that a lot of the stigma against bisexuality comes from within the LGBTQ community, especially if you are bi+ and in a straight passing relationship. And though you don't really feel like you belong in either space, and that already impacts your mental health in obvious ways. You just don't feel, there's a sense of non-belonging. And I think for all of my queer clients, and for most of the queer people that I know, this sense of non-belonging is probably our biggest tragedy. And I don't want to sound very dramatic about it, but
you sound a little bit.
Just a little, just a tad. But there is this feeling of longing to belong to something that permeates a lot of queer experiences, no matter what kind of gender, sexual minority that they are. So from that standpoint, I feel like, I feel like being underrepresented in certain spaces definitely makes you feel unworthy in different ways.
I'm just going to the research, because you went all dramatic, so I have to go back to the
time
facts
for science.
A little bit. No, it's like we said, like, you know, minority stress, social support, identity. The thing is, if you don't find the social support in the queer space, as you said, you don't have a sense of belonging, so you're kind of cut from that. So it's not always true. I mean, I have had a very good experience with queer spaces and being accepted personally, but I know it's not always the case. And then you can try to talk to the cis straight people, and it just doesn't work because they don't understand, or some of them only can understand. And then so there's that social support part, and then the identity part. And then if you're underrepresented, if no one tells you that it's okay to be the way you are, that other people who are exactly, I mean, kind of like you, who you can have this idea that yes, your life can be okay. The thing of that, I want to see what my life will look like after coming out. What kind of life can I lead when I'm bi and poly, or bi and monogamous, and how does it work? Do I come to my children as bisexual if I'm in a straight passing relationship? What's happening? All of that If you have that on TV, it changes everything because you can build your identity. You can build something from that. Makes sense, and so you can protect yourself against the stigma. But if you don't have social support and you don't have any resources to build your identity, you have more mental health issues, and it's what happens.
And especially then, because more often than not, any queer character that does have mental health issues, it's a sole reaction to their queerness. And I'm not saying that you're existing as a queer person in the world doesn't tend to be an element that's affecting your mental health, but mental health is also affected by so many other things, and your illness is because of so many other things. And I think I would love to see a character who, like me, like I love myself and I love my identity, I'm really proud of myself, but I still struggle with these things, and like it doesn't go away because I'm out, and it doesn't go away because I've accepted myself.
Yeah, it's very layered. And to go back to the very first question.
Okay. Well, we've run out of time. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Do you guys want to say where people can find you on social media, if you'd like to share that?
+_art on Twitter, Positive Change Arts Projects on Instagram, #query series. And you can see our faces a lot there. Yeah, that's it.
You can find me at my website, handeacon.com, and through that you can find my Instagram and Twitter, and you can also read some of my work and see my art and stuff, and also a link to my Etsy if anyone wants to buy some cool Christmas presents for people and help an old queer out.
So the practice name is PSYNT, and we work on Skype. And the podcast, I'll let you do that.
Yeah, and the podcast is Bi Positive. You can find us on SoundCloud and iTunes, and on Twitter. We're very active on our Twitter, so if you want to reach out, talk to us, set up an interview, we'd love to hear your stories, and also love to give a platform to people who haven't been heard. It would be lovely to get some feedback from you.
Yeah, and we're going to go get a drink at the lounge if some people want to chat.
If you'd like to join us. All right.